So after like 5 million elections, Israel finally has a new prime minister. What's actually interesting is Benjamin Netanyahu. He was insanely corrupt. He was doing deals with allowing mergers of news agencies that in exchange would remove bad coverage of him, bad stories of him. But also, the police had multiple corruption charges against him recommended. And so basically, he was doing the same thing as Trump, where he was trying to stay in power as long as he possibly could to shield himself from um, uh, literal criminal charges. And now what I'm seeing is even, Likud party members are calling him out and saying, like, I don't know if he's shredding documents or he's just going crazy. So they now have a new prime minister, but it does not appear that this guy is really any different. His name is Naftali Bennett. It's not Benny Gantz, who was in a really, really close race against him, and they just couldn't form a coalition. They have a multi-party system. A big, big issue with multi-party systems is a lot of fracturing of parties and splintering, and just it's too hard to form a government. And so this new prime minister, after the Iranian election where they elected their president, which the president in Iran doesn't do shit, they don't have any power. But it was a hardliner guy, Ebrahim Raisi, who was elected. And so he's basically warning against the U.S. against making a nuclear deal with them. So this article says Israel condemned on Sunday the election of hardline judge Ebrahim Raisi as Iranian president, saying his would be a regime of brutal hangmen with which world powers should not negotiate a new nuclear deal. Raisi, who is under U.S. sanctions for human rights abuses, secured victory as expected on Saturday in Iran's presidential election after a contest marked by voter apathy over economic hardships and political restrictions. It says Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, convening his first televised cabinet session since taking office last week, described Raisi's ascent as enabled by Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei rather than by a free and popular vote. Raisi's election is, I would say, the last chance for world powers to wake up for returning to the nuclear agreement and understand who they are doing business with. Again, it's also kind of funny that they're saying this, bro. Like, Netanyahu is doing a bunch of shit to rig elections for himself. Like, what the fuck? It's kind of hilarious. A lot of countries do this kind of stuff. It says a regime of brutal hangmen must never be allowed to have weapons of mass destruction. Israel's position will never change on this. And so what's weird is they're basically super anti the Iran deal. But if your goal is to prevent them from getting nuclear weapons, not only is the Iran nuclear deal the best situation, but what is your other option? Do you want the United States to literally blow them off the face of the planet? Do you want them to occupy Iran? Do you want them to make Iran cower, or not cower, but submit to them at threat of nuclear force? Like, what the fuck do you want? It's so bizarre. This is not the strategy that you go with, even in the slightest. Iran is actually pretty fertile ground for a liberal democracy. The people of Iran are nowhere near as extreme as people may think, and there is some fertile ground there. But the U.S. does this weird political game where it treats Iran like the enemy of the world, and it's the complete evil and all this stuff. Even though Saudi Arabia is way worse. So that's really stupid. And then Iran responds in the same way because of what the U.S. is doing. I think that if the U.S. took a more friendly tone towards them, they could actually push them into being a liberal democracy. Definitely could totally happen. But they don't want to do that. And so Israel is basically trying to get the U.S. to fight wars for them, especially one that would be insane. I mean, think of the Iraq War. Like, this would be like 5,000 times worse than that. It would be insanely worse, especially if the army were to not quit like they did in Iraq. It would be way, way, way worse. This would be horrifyingly bad. So Israel is basically trying to get the U.S. to invade or do some kind of military action. And that's what they're trying to do. They're warmongering, literally here. It's like definition of warmongering, essentially. But the real strategy is get a U.S. nuclear deal. The fact that you fucking left it was stupid as hell. It tarnishes your reputation. It makes it so that countries can't really take you at your word anymore. And the best thing to do is to exchange, obviously they remove the sanctions. You remove the sanctions, which is giving them their own money back, the assets that you froze. And In exchange, they agreed to allow the international agency, what is the Atomic Energy Agency or something like that, the IAEA, part of the United Nations. They go in, they inspect the nuclear reactors, and they see, how enriched uranium is. You know, that is what they do. That is the deal, and that's how you keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons, not by whatever weird plan Israel has. Like, what, just bomb them? Is that your solution? That's not a solution to anything, and at that point, you're not even honest actors anymore. That's the situation here. Unfortunately, it does not appear that. And this guy is a right winger as well, just so you guys know. He's part of a different party. I don't think he's part of the Likud party, but he is still a right winger, unfortunately.